Welcome to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy, where Sunday's sermon sparks Wednesday's conversation. Each week, they sit down to dive deeper, reflect thoughtfully, and wrestle with the themes of this week's message. Their goal is to explore faith more fully, ask the hard questions, and invite you into a dialogue that goes beyond the pulpit.
Welcome into the podcast, everyone. I'm Pastor Randy Moore.
And I'm Pastor Andy Payton.
Good to sit down with you, Pastor Andy. It's going to be March 1st already this Sunday.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That means it's a communion Sunday too.
It is. So February being shorter can kind of catch us by surprise sometime. But
Lent always sneaks up on us along with Easter.
Yeah. Well, we had a special Sunday here at Methodist Temple last Sunday. We had a visit from our bishop, and that's a rather rare occurrence, right? Because our bishop is the bishop over Indiana. There are lots of churches, and so it was an honor to get a visit.
Yeah. Honors, I think, a good way to describe it. She came and she spoke and hung out with us. I love our Bishop Tracy. Bishop Tracy Smith Malone. I think one of the things I loved about her the most, Randy, was how pastoral she was. Yeah. She spent time with us. She ate with us. Preached a wonderful message, and so I realize not everyone maybe understands what a bishop is, and so within the United Methodist Church, we're a connectional church, and what that means is that like pastors will oversee local congregations, and then we have district superintendents, and they oversee districts of congregations, and then the bishop oversees what we call a conference, which in our case is the Indiana Conference, so the entire state of Indiana. And what our bishop really does is oversee the entire state. And maybe one way to think about it, she's sort of like the governor or the CEO of our conference. And what bishops primarily do, though, is they'll appoint pastors within the conference. And then they also represent kind of the regional mission of the church, too.
I think it is interesting to let people know that the United Methodist Church, the Methodist Church, it wasn't united until later, but the Methodist Church in America started at the same time as America. When the first Methodists came over, they came over to the colonies. And so the birth of our nation and the birth of our Methodist Church, those births happened at about the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think it is interesting that they chose at that time to set up the church the way that the country is set up with this system of checks and balances and the various branches. Just like the United States has an executive branch, which is filled by the president, and then they've got a legislative branch through Congress, and then a judicial branch through the Supreme Court and the court system. The Methodist Church has those same bodies as a system of checks and balances. Yeah. But it's also interesting that and this just didn't start with President Trump, Congress has been ceding more and more power to the executive. But in the Methodist Church, the executive is rather weak if you're going to compare it, to the way the United States is operating. But just the fact that they decided to set it up that way, that's a really interesting fact.
It is interesting. And I mean, since we're bringing up the historical aspect of it all, I think that's one of the things that made early Methodism so effective was that the way that we were organized is we had these bishops who in some ways were kind of like field generals who were sending out pastors as the frontier was expanding, as America was being born. You'll notice, especially in the Midwest, there's a Methodist church almost in every little town. And that's because while the congregational churches were having their congregational votes, we had bishops who were like, you're going there and you're going there. And so we can make quick decisions and we can move fairly quickly as life was changing. I have to believe that's part of what made us so effective. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but that organizational aspect was effective for us.
Yeah, and I think it's always good to point out, too, our polity, which is a churchy word or just a kind of a big word for structure or organization. Our polity is connectional, you mentioned it, or episcopal. We have a bishop. There is a hierarchy, as opposed to congregational. And I think that probably most people would think that all churches are congregational in the sense that they govern themselves, they make their own decisions, they take their own votes, they hire their own pastors.
Right.
Well, that for us, that's not the way it is for us. There's a very big difference between being connectional and being congregational.
There are many things that I would say there's overlap between the two ways of doing ministry. But the big one is the way pastors are placed. In the United Methodist Connectional Church, where we have a bishop, an episcopacy, the bishop's the one that makes the appointment of pastors. And in a congregational system, it's kind of a call system where they'll call pastors to come and interview at a congregation, and then the congregation ultimately has the vote. Both, I think, are good systems, but they just do it differently.
Right. What are some of the pros and cons? I mean, I'll jump in, not to put you on the spot. Some of the things that are good about it and some of the things that are bad. I like the connectional system. I grew up under a more congregational system, even though I wouldn't have been familiar with that term. But if you're going to govern yourself, then that's going to lead to lots of infighting, right?
It can, yeah.
It can lead to lots of infighting. And then the pastor then, who is getting hired by the congregation, then has to please that congregation. Sometimes it can work very, very well, and you'll see a pastor in one congregational church for 30 years, but they work for the church. You and I don't work for the church. We're not members of don't work for the local congregation.
Right.
We're members of the conference, and so that theoretically gives us freedom, especially prophetic freedom. That what we say in the pulpit, we say it because we think we hear God speaking that to us, rather than an attempt to please the crowd, so to speak, and keep our job.
Yeah. And the way that pastors are placed, it does put us in a position where we can speak our mind, maybe in ways where pastors in other situations are not able to. I'll say the pro. The pro of the congregational system really is a congregational system. They can make some quick decisions, though.
Okay. Yeah.
They can operate more like, to use it, just an illustration analogy here, like a speedboat. They can operate that way. Think of the United Methodist Church and our connectional more like a aircraft carrier.
Right.
I mean, we can make some quick decisions, don't get me wrong, because in our system, clergy have been empowered in such a way where decisions can be made. But sometimes there are other things that come up where we have to move slowly. I think another a pro for the Methodist Church way of appointing pastors particularly would be, like you were mentioning, the politics don't play in as much. I'm not saying there's not politics. There's always church politics. Right. But that kind of all congregation meeting just doesn't happen much in our system. I think there's only a couple different occasions where that could happen, but it's not going to happen for a pastor. And the hard part of it, though, is a congregation can fall in love with their pastor or pastors, and those pastors eventually are going to be moved on. I mean, all pastors obviously are going to move on at some point, but sometimes in the Methodist Church we'll move on a little sooner than later, and that can be hard on people, and it can be hard on congregations sometimes too.
You hear from people who've been around the Methodist Church for a number of years that back in the day, their pastors would be moved every 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And while we still have that same system, those tenures are a little bit longer these days, generally speaking, aren't they?
Yeah. The way I've always explained that is culturally, back in, let's say, 1950, we had institutional authority as a church. And so what I mean by that is, like, people automatically trusted pastors just because a person was a pastor in the 1940s, 50s, in that era. And so in that culture, really, you could move a pastor from one town to another one, and they would automatically have authority by virtue of the office of pastor. Fast forward to the present situation, that's really no longer as true. It is true in some ways, but not nearly as much. Instead of institutional authority, really, we have to earn it today. And I would describe it as like a relational authority, where if you want to make a change, a culture change within the life of the church, leadership has to stick around for a while to make that happen, as opposed to when culture was much more uniform in a lot of ways. it was easier to navigate and move pastors around every 3 or 4 years, back in the day. And today that's just not as effective.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the bishop. So the bishop, it wasn't Tracy Malone who appointed you and me. She's rather new to the job, but we were appointed here by a bishop. And so in my education in the system, they always talked about how that the church itself, the local church itself, is where things really happen, and it's what most church members identify with.
Right.
But the basic unit is that annual conference because of that appointment system.
Yeah. Our book of discipline, church law, would say that the annual conference, what the bishop is overseeing, is the basic governing body of the church, which, people are like, whoa, but think about it. Like, we live in the state of Indiana. That's kind of like the basic governing body of our state. And as you were saying, we mirror one another in terms of the way the United States has been organized and the way the United Methodist Church is organized today as well.
Yeah. Okay, so Bishop Malone, as we said, was here on Sunday. She delivered the message on the first Sunday in Lent.
Yeah.
And it was an impressive message.
It was. She's an impressive leader. Bishop Tracy is the first woman, female, that's been our bishop here in the Indiana Conference. First African-American, I think, female who has been in charge of the Council of Bishops. And that's the gathering of worldwide bishops. So she's quite a leader. Yeah. And she did a wonderful job talking about the traditional text. We use Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, where Jesus is just baptized. He hears the voice of God saying, "You're my beloved." Jesus is God's beloved. He goes on into the wilderness. I always point out, led by the Spirit. Led by the Spirit to go into...
Sometimes driven.
Driven, yeah. It's even stronger. Yeah, you're right, in some places. And he undergoes 3 tests. And I don't know if we want to talk about the test, maybe.
Let's do. First, let's set it up by talking about what Lent is. Most of our people do, but some people, they do not. I didn't know what Lent was all through growing up. I went to a Southern Baptist church, and non-liturgical. We didn't observe Lent. So, Lent.
Okay. Well, Lent is based upon Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. So 40 days of Lent, not counting Sundays. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days. And so they mirror one another. Our season of Lent mirrors Jesus' wilderness experience. And so what are we doing becomes the question. What Lent really is about, it's not about suffering. It's not about thinking less of ourselves or feeling guilty as much as what Lent really is about is it's a season of preparation. Just like Jesus was preparing for his ministry, we as Christians, we prepare our hearts every year for 40 days as well. Maybe another way to think about Lent would be instead of Lent being about trying harder, I would suggest Lent is more about coming back home to the one who calls us home, which of course is God. And it's helpful to have this season in our lives where we do think about what's most important and what are the voices that are keeping me from hearing what's most important, and what are the ways that I've got myself or we've got ourselves tangled up in something that is pulling us away from our best self or our true self. And so I didn't grow up with Lent either, Randy, but I've really grown to love it because I'm a human being and we all need to push that reset button at least annually. And this is a ritualized form of that reset button.
And it's preparation for Easter. We're always Easter people, but Easter is so much more rich if you've experienced it after this period of Lent and preparation.
Well, dare I say, I'm not sure we're experiencing Easter if we have not done Lent. I mean, Easter worship, Easter Sunday is beautiful. Don't get me wrong. Everyone comes to church. It's this big celebration. Great. But that's not really all that it's about. If you haven't done the work beforehand, the Lent preparation, spiritually speaking, I think you're not in the place you could be. I'm not saying God can't use the Easter Sunday worship experience. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure you're we're not experiencing it at its fullest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's intensified during Holy Week itself. If you go from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, you miss something as well. Mm-hmm. And I always encourage our people, ever since I've been in ministry, wherever I was, encourage people to take part as much as you can in the season of Lent, and then in that Holy Week. It's hard for people. A lot of those services happen during work hours. It's out of their normal rhythms. Mm-hmm. And so attendance will be down. And so if we have, a fourth of our regular attendance, we're happy with that. And we understand why people can't do all that.
Right.
But there are so many more opportunities through online resources. I think we could find a way without showing up that we can
absolutely. Yeah.
practice these things.
Fast, give something up or add something on.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful kind of to do a little bit of each,
right,
in my experience. But it's really, again, it's about creating space for us to grow in our sense of God. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't I go ahead and read this text that we've already mentioned and see if there are some things we can draw out of it. Again, it's Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you were the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. I think the first thing to notice is that Jesus was either led or driven by the Spirit. Mm-hmm. This is God's work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people are like, what? Uh-huh. He's being tempted. You mean God's doing the tempting? Well, no, it clearly says the devil. And we can talk more about what we mean by that too. Yeah. There's different ways to interpret that. But he's clearly being led by God in this season of preparation for what is yet to come. Mm-hmm. And each one of the temptations, in some ways, they challenge Jesus' identity. Mm-hmm. That's the best way I can describe it. And the bishop, she picked up on that too. So you have to connect the temptation with the baptism. So in the baptism, Jesus' identity is revealed. He's the beloved of God. It's who he is. Mm-hmm. He's the beloved of God. God's well pleased with Jesus. And so from there, it's like God says, this is who you are, but you're going to have to get confident in that. And so Jesus then goes into the wilderness, and the first test that he endures is after fasting for 40 days, the devil comes and says, well, if you're the Son of God, so he's questioning Jesus' identity. If you're the Son of God, then turn the stones into bread. So, I mean, what's happening there? What's the real temptation? And I think just on a basic level, Randy, the first temptation is we seek to prove our value by what we do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That our value is tied into what we do. And now we've landed in the modern world. This sounds like some old story from thousands of years ago, and it is, but it's the same old story. And much of the time, we as people, we find our sense of worth from our careers, our roles, and these sorts of things. And we think that we have to perform these things in order to be loved. Mm-hmm. And what Jesus is doing here is saying, no, I don't need to do that to to prove who I am. Then the next one, I think, what was the next one, Randy? That's the temple
Takes him
one.
to the holy city, places him on the pinnacle of the temple.
Yeah. So I think Henry Nouwen interprets that as, and this is my favorite way to talk about that second one. So tempter takes Jesus to the highest place around the temple, middle of Jerusalem, says, jump off. And God will send angels and catch you at the last minute. And what better way to kick off your ministry, right?
Right.
Like, it's spectacular.
Right.
And that's sort of the second temptation. Like, I will be valued. I will be loved when I do something spectacular. Mm-hmm. I'll be known. Mm-hmm. And then that will satisfy this hunger. And of course, Jesus says no to that. And then, I think the last one was the kingdoms.
Yeah, it takes him to a high mountain.
Offers him all the kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And the way I've heard that one explained is the temptation for power. Mm-hmm. Rather than love people, we want to control people. And that's such a subtle distinction. And but at the end of the day, every test is tied to his identity. Mm-hmm. And here's what the invitation of Lent becomes, again, not about trying harder, but by listening to the voice of the one who calls us home. And that voice, of course, is God's love. And what do we mean when we say God loves us? What do we mean? We toss that language around like, God loves you. You know, I would explain it this way. You're desired. God desires for you to be you. Mm-hmm. And that's there well before any of these other things happen in our lives. Before what we do, before what we have, before what other people say about us. Our desire for us is already there. God already loves us. And once we get tuned into that, then we can navigate the world in a way where we're much more centered and not seeking the need of approval or success or those kinds of things.
What do you make of this last line? It's really beautiful. Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came. Yeah, and waited on him.
Well, I mean, the devil, the angels. What do we do with that language in general? Some people are going to literalize it and say, there's an actual spiritual entity that's a fallen angel that we call the devil. Right. And then other people are going to interpret that as it's an ancient way of talking about the inner voices that we all have. Mm-hmm. A person can decide how they feel about that. But that's one way to think about the devil. So what are the angels? Well, that could be an angel, could be an entity from heaven, a spiritual entity from heaven, or it could be a way of talking about the God moments that come along the way when we're seeking to walk God's path. Mm-hmm. We've all experienced it, right? In our journey where just the right text message comes. Mm-hmm. The word angel actually means messenger. Just the right message comes. Just the right word of encouragement comes. And I think that's a huge reason why the church is so important. It's like, there is really no solo Christian. You're not going to do it alone, really. And so we come together, and just by being together and encouraging one another, we become messengers that can continue it on to help it along, so we are able to continue to walk faithfully.
This next Sunday in Lent, you're going to go to the book of Genesis.
Yes. So I'm going to pick up on the theme of 40, mm-hmm. and the theme is going to be 40 days to freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea of Lent, about going back home, becoming free. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to pick up on the story of Noah, where, of course, he's in the ark for 40 days. And here's just a quick preview. What does 40 really represent? 40 represents preparation, yes. It also represents the season of in-between. Mm-hmm. There's the world that was, there's the world that's going to be, and there's the season between. And the truth of the matter is, we're almost always in the season of in-between. Mm-hmm. And what the story of Noah, I think, does is give us a helpful way of how to navigate those waters. And so that's what I'm going to talk about.
Cool. All right, Pastor Andy, thanks a lot. And we will look forward to that. Thank you so much for finding our podcast and watching. We appreciate it so much. We hope you have a church home somewhere, but if you don't, you're more than welcome to join us here at the Methodist Temple in Evansville. We worship at 8:30 in a traditional way, and then at 11 in a more contemporary way. You can also worship with us online. But the fact that you found our podcast, that really warms our heart. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you again next week. Have a great one.
Thank you for listening to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. We hope you'll join us next week. We see Christ in you.